The air in my observatory was a perpetual, stale hum. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light that pierced the grime-streaked dome, testament to months, perhaps years, of my singular focus. My world had shrunk to this cramped, star-speckled bubble, perched precariously on a desolate mountainside. Outside, the wind howled, a constant, mournful companion that I barely registered anymore. Inside, the only sounds were the whirring of my equipment and the frantic yet precise clicking of my own thoughts. I am Seth. That is all that matters now. The name itself feels like a relic, a whisper from a life I'd meticulously shed. My hands, calloused and stained with printer ink, moved with practiced efficiency across the worn console. The screen before me, a mosaic of data streams and spectral analysis, was my universe. For years, I'd been chasing ghosts in the void, anomalies that hinted at physics beyond our ken. Not for fame, not for recognition, simply because they were there, a persistent itch in reality that only I seemed to feel. Tonight, the itch was a tremor. A faint, persistent signal originating from a region of space I'd catalogued as unremarkable. It wasn't the power of the signal that unnerved me, but its nature. It was too ordered, too deliberate to be a natural phenomenon. It pulsed with a rhythm that felt intentional, like a heartbeat, but not of flesh and blood. A cosmic respiration, slow and vast. My breath hitched. I ran the analysis again, cross-referencing with every known stellar event, every celestial quirk. Nothing. The signal remained a stubborn stain on the otherwise pristine black canvas. I leaned closer, my nose almost touching the cool glass of the monitor. The faint scent of ozone, a byproduct of my overworked processors, filled my nostrils. It was a familiar smell, the perfume of my obsession. The signal wasn't a broadcast, not in the way we understood it. It was more like a ripple, a disturbance in the very medium of space-time. And it was growing, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up older data, stretching back years. I searched for any trace, any echo of this peculiar signature, and I found it, faint, almost lost in the background noise of the universe, but there. It had been there, waiting. My heart, usually a steady drumbeat against my ribs, began to quicken. Not with fear, not yet, with a profound, unsettling curiosity. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was a message, or perhaps a symptom. I pushed away from the console, my chair scraping loudly against the concrete floor. The sound was jarring, an intrusion into the quiet hum of my existence. I needed air. Real air, not the recycled breath of my sanctuary. I grabbed my heavy coat, the wool rough against my skin, and descended the narrow, winding stairs that led from the observatory to the mountain's surface. The night air was sharp, biting. The stars, usually a source of solace, seemed to press down on me, their silent, indifferent gaze amplified by my growing unease. I walked aimlessly at first, the rough terrain a familiar challenge under my worn boots. What was it, and why had it suddenly become so? Present, my path led me, as it often did when I was lost in thought, towards the mouth of the cave system with paintings that move in torchlight. They said the paintings within shifted, that the figures on the walls writhed and danced in the flickering light. I had always dismissed it as folklore, the fanciful imaginings of isolated minds. But tonight the legend felt different. It felt connected. I retrieved my old kerosene torch from its usual spot near the cave entrance. With a flick of my thumb, the wick caught, casting a warm, unsteady glow. I stepped inside. The air immediately grew damp, heavy with the scent of earth and something else, something ancient and mineral. As I moved deeper, the torchlight danced across the rough-hewn walls, and then I saw them. Crude ochre figures etched into the stone, animals, hunters, strange geometric patterns, the usual fare for such places. But as I swept the torch beam, something. I blinked, my eyes adjusting. The effect was gone. I moved on, my steps hesitant now. The torchlight flickered, and again the painting seemed to breathe. A series of dots arranged in a spiral appeared to spin. A human-like figure, its arms raised, seemed to sway. It was an illusion, of course, yet my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the steady drip of water. The air felt thick, charged. I held the torch steady, my hand trembling. The paintings remained still. I moved it again, slowly, and there it was. The long-limbed creature, its outline blurring, its posture changing. It wasn't just the light. It was as if the very pigment of the paint was fluid, responding to the shifting illumination, rearranging itself into new, unsettling forms. I backed away, my boots crunching on loose scree. The deep hum of the cosmos, the one I'd been listening to from my observatory, seemed to echo in the cavern. It was a low, resonant vibration, felt more than heard, and as the torchlight caught a particularly dense cluster of markings, I saw it. Not a painting, but a symbol, a complex interlocking pattern that I had seen before. Not in any ancient text, but on my monitors, in the data stream from the anomaly. My breath caught in my throat. The symbol pulsed or seemed to pulse in the unsteady light. It was the same impossible geometry, the same intricate self-referential design that marked the cosmic signal. How? How could something so ancient, so earthly, be linked to something so impossibly distant? And what did it mean that the paintings moved, that this symbol appeared to shift and reform just as the distant ripple in space-time was growing? Was this place a key or a warning? The faint, rhythmic thrumming had been a constant companion for weeks, a low-frequency whisper beneath the usual cacophony of cosmic static. I dismissed it initially as interference, a stray signal from a dying pulsar or the groan of a distant black hole. But it persisted, weaving itself into the very fabric of my data streams, an alien melody in the symphony of the void. My fingers, stained with ink and the metallic tang of solder, flew across the console, chasing the anomaly. It wasn't a single source, not a pinpoint of light or a predictable wave. It was a pattern, a vast, undulating presence that seemed to breathe across unimaginable distances. I reran the calculations, then again and again. Each iteration confirmed the impossible. The signal wasn't natural. It defied every known law of physics, every established model of the universe. It was too ordered, too deliberate. The sterile air of the observatory suddenly felt suffocating, thick with the scent of old paper and ozone. I pushed away from the humming machinery, my legs unsteady. The mountains outside, usually a comforting, stoic presence, seemed to their jagged peaks like teeth against the bruised twilight sky. Sleep offered no respite. When I awoke, the thrumming was louder, or perhaps it was simply that my mind was now attuned to it, a sensitive instrument vibrating in sympathy. I needed to see it, to touch it, to understand. The data wasn't enough. My gaze fell upon the dusty crates stacked in the corner. They contained relics from my grandfather, a man who'd believed in things beyond the visible spectrum, things that whispered in the wind and painted stories on cave walls. He'd spent his life exploring, collecting, seeking. Among his possessions, I remembered, was a collection of artifacts from a remote region, a place riddled with ancient myths. He'd spoken of a specific site with a kind of hushed reverence, the cave system with paintings that move in torchlight. He'd always claimed the art wasn't static, that the figures shifted, pulsed, responded. I dismissed it as fanciful folklore then. Now a desperate spark of an idea ignited. The journey was arduous. The wind howled like a tormented spirit, rattling the vehicle's frame. The anomaly, however, remained a constant presence in my mind, a silent echo in the vast emptiness. It was as if the signal itself had drawn me here, a phantom lure in the cosmic deep. Finally, I found it. A jagged fissure in the mountainside, shrouded by gnarled pines. I retrieved my grandfather's heavy lantern from the jeep, its brass tarnished, its wick well used. The air inside was heavy, ancient. The smell of damp earth mingled with something else, something faintly metallic like dried blood, and a cloying sweetness I couldn't quite place. My boots crunched on loose scree. Figures, crude and primal, stared back at me. Hunters with spears, animals in flight, strange celestial symbols I didn't recognize. But as I moved, the paintings did shift. It wasn't a trick of the light, not an illusion born of my fatigue. The painted eyes of a hunting beast seemed to track my movement. The lines of a falling spear subtly rearranged themselves as if caught in an unseen current. A cluster of stars, depicted with uncanny accuracy, pulsed with a faint internal luminescence. My breath hitched. This wasn't mere art. It was something alive, something that remembered. I moved deeper into the labyrinthine passages, the torchlight my only guide. The paintings grew more complex, more disturbing. Figures contorted, merging into impossible shapes. The celestial symbols became dominant, swirling in patterns that mirrored, disturbingly, the complex waveforms of the anomaly I'd detected in deep space. This place, this ancient echo of humanity's earliest fears and wonderings, was somehow connected to the signal. The vast, alien intelligence I'd glimpsed in the data wasn't just out there. It had touched this world long ago, leaving its mark on these stone canvases. The painted figures seemed to lean in, their silent gazes now accusatory or perhaps pleading. The thrumming, which I had thought I'd left behind in my observatory, was here too, a faint vibration in the rock beneath my feet, a resonance with the pulsing stars on the cave walls. Was this a warning or an invitation? The hum. It was no longer a whisper. It had amplified, a physical presence that vibrated not just in my headphones, but in the very marrow of my bones. My observatory, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, felt like a drum, each beat of the anomaly resonating through the metal and concrete. Sleep offered no escape. The thrumming found its way into my dreams, morphing into the grinding of colossal gears, the scraping of impossibly vast tectonic plates. I'd stopped eating properly, my meals becoming hasty affairs, often forgotten entirely. My reflection in the darkened monitor screens showed a gaunt stranger, eyes wide and bloodshot, a perpetual tremor in my hands. I'd tried to isolate it to pinpoint its origin. The raw data was maddeningly inconsistent, a kaleidoscope of impossible energy signatures. It defied every known law of physics. It was a hole in the universe, a place where reality frayed at the edges. Days blurred into nights as I hunched over my consoles, the only light the cool, sterile glow of the displays. My colleagues, those I still deigned to speak with, expressed concern. Their voices, tinged with that familiar, condescending pity, felt like distant static, easily filtered out. They couldn't understand. How could they? They weren't hearing it. The breakthrough, if one could call it that, came not from my instruments, but from a forgotten corner of my own mind, a flicker of a memory from my childhood. My grandfather, a man who'd filled my young head with tales of ancient lore and forgotten gods, had once spoken of places where the veil between worlds was thin. And he'd mentioned paintings. Paintings that shifted, that moved with the light. A wild, desperate hope, or perhaps the first tendrils of true madness, seized me. I remembered a particular legend he'd told about a hidden network of caves, deep within the unforgiving mountains that ringed the old mining town. He'd called it the cave system with paintings that move in torchlight. He'd never taken me there, deeming me too young, too impressionable. But the description, the unsettling imagery, had lodged itself deep within me. I packed a rucksack with essentials, a powerful torch, extra batteries, a portable spectrometer, a notebook, and a flask of lukewarm coffee. The old Jeep groaned and protested over the rutted tracks, the mountain air growing thin and sharp. The sun dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. A primal fear, one I hadn't felt since childhood, began to prickle at the back of my neck. This was a place untamed, ancient. The air that drifted out was damp and carried the scent of wet earth and something else, something mineral and deeply, unsettlingly old. The passage sloped downwards, the rough-hewn walls slick with condensation. The paintings. They covered the walls, crude and yet disturbingly sophisticated. Stick figures, animals, abstract swirls. But as I moved the torch, they changed. A figure's arm seemed to lengthen, an animal's eye blinked. It was an illusion, I told myself, the flickering light playing tricks. But the hum, faint at first, began to seep from the very stone, a low thrum that seemed to emanate from the painted figures themselves. I traced the lines of a swirling pattern with my finger. My spectrometer, held aloft, registered anomalous energy readings, fluctuations that made no sense. They pulsed in time with the rhythmic drone. I moved deeper, the torch beam dancing across the walls, revealing more and more of the unsettling artwork. The figures seemed to watch me, their painted eyes following my every move. They were a record, a warning, or perhaps a map. Forms that were vaguely humanoid but with too many limbs, too many eyes. Swirling vortexes that seemed to draw the light into themselves. And the hum intensified, a deep resonating chord that made my teeth ache. I felt a profound sense of being observed, not by any living thing but by the cave itself, by the ancient intelligence that had etched these images into existence. I was no longer alone, and whatever shared this space with me was not of this world, or perhaps it was older than this world. What had I stumbled into? The hum. Sleep had become a forgotten luxury. My eyes, bloodshot and gritty, scanned the monitors, seeking any shift, any deviation that might explain the growing unease. The data was a chaotic ballet of numbers and waveforms, yet beneath the noise a pattern was emerging, a maddeningly consistent pulse. It was the same pulse I detected from the void, now somehow closer. I'd tried to rationalize it. Equipment malfunction, solar flares, even a particularly aggressive strain of tinnitus. But the sheer, undeniable correlation between the deep space readings and this terrestrial thrumming was too much to dismiss. It was like hearing a distant, monstrous roar and then feeling the ground tremble beneath my feet. The sky outside the observatory dome had taken on a peculiar hue, a bruised, almost sickly violet that deepened with the setting sun. The stars, usually pinpricks of familiar light, seemed to writhe, their positions subtly, unnervingly altered. I rubbed my temples, the persistent hum of physical ache behind my eyes. I knew I was teetering, my grip on what I considered reality fraying at the edges, but the evidence, however terrifying, was undeniable. My research notes, once meticulously organized, were now a chaotic sprawl across my desk. I'd circled and recircled the same few lines of data, a desperate attempt to find a flaw, a logical explanation that would banish the encroaching madness. But there was none. The anomaly was real, and it was no longer confined to the distant reaches of space. The first real tremor of its terrestrial manifestation wasn't a seismic event, not in the way the geologists understood it. It was subtler, a shift in the ambient energy of the world. The power grid flickered erratically, not in surges, but in a rhythmic dimming, mirroring the pulse I heard in my headphones. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, as if the very air was charged with an unknown static. I needed to get away from the observatory, from the constant, maddening hum. The isolation, once my comfort, now felt like a trap. I packed a small bag, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. My gaze kept drifting to the window, to the strange, pulsating violet sky. I had to go somewhere, anywhere, to escape the direct resonance of the anomaly. My thoughts, fragmented and panicked, latched onto a desperate idea. The old maps, the ones I'd collected years ago, detailing forgotten subterranean networks. I slammed the dial off, my hands shaking. The hum was everywhere now, a low thrumming that vibrated through the car chassis, through the very asphalt beneath my tires. It was no longer just in my ears, it was in my teeth, in my stomach, a deep, disquieting resonance. The entrance to the cave system was a jagged scar in the earth, hidden behind a thicket of gnarled trees. The air here was cool, damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else, something ancient and undisturbed. I fumbled with my flashlight, its beam cutting a wavering path into the blackness. As I ventured deeper, the walls of the cave began to reveal themselves. They were covered in a profusion of paintings, crude and ancient, depicting figures in strange dances, animals with impossible horns, and swirling patterns that seemed to mimic the nebulae I studied. I held my flashlight steady, tracing the lines of a hunter with a spear. Then a flicker. The painted spear seemed to twitch. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. It was the torchlight, of course. But as I moved deeper, the effect became more pronounced. A painted beast, its eyes wide and vacant, seemed to turn its head, following my beam. The swirling patterns on the wall pulsed, not with the light, but with an internal luminescence that seemed to shift and writhe. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. This was no trick of the light. The paintings were alive, or at least they were responding. Responding to what? To the hum? I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a loose rock. The hum, which had receded somewhat in the deeper parts of the cave, surged back, a tidal wave of sound that pressed in on me from all sides. The painted figures, I imagined, were now fully animated, their movements mirroring the unseen horror that had followed me here. Was this what the anomaly felt like? A presence so vast, so ancient, that it could imprint itself onto reality itself, even onto the ancient pigments of a forgotten people. And was I now trapped within its influence, deep beneath the earth, with the only testament to its existence being the shifting, terrifying art on the cave walls? The hum was a physical thing now. It pressed against my eardrums, a low, guttural thrum that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere. My observatory, perched on its lonely peak, no longer felt like a haven. The very air seemed to thicken, charged with an unseen energy. I ripped the headphones off, the sudden silence a violent shock. But the hum persisted, a phantom limb of sound that I felt in my teeth, in the soles of my feet. I needed to get away from it to clear my head. The data logs were a chaotic mess, a testament to my sleep-deprived obsession. I'd been staring at the same spectral lines for days, convinced I was missing something vital. A pattern, a key, but the anomaly, whatever it was, remained stubbornly opaque. Its signature was unlike anything catalogued, a discordant symphony of frequencies that defied my understanding of the cosmos. It felt alive and ancient and vast. A sudden urge, primal and illogical, seized me. I needed to touch something real, something old. The old maps, tucked away in a forgotten drawer, showed a network of caves not far from my mountain. Local legends spoke of them, whispers of strange markings within, but I'd always dismissed them as folklore. Now they called to me. A desperate, irrational pull. I packed a minimal kit, a powerful LED torch, a sturdy rope, a canteen of water. The trek down the mountain was fraught with a nervous energy. The hum seemed to follow, a low thrumming beneath the wind's shriek. The entrance to the cave system with paintings that move in torchlight was a gaping maw in the earth, shrouded by gnarled pines. The air grew heavy, the pressure building in my chest. My breath hitched. This was foolish. I should turn back. Deeper I went, the passage widening into a cavern. The paintings, they adorned the walls, rendered in ochre and charcoal, primitive yet disturbingly intricate. Figures danced, hunted, and observed. But it was the way the light fell upon them. As I moved the torch, the painted figures seemed to writhe, to shift. A hunter's spear seemed to lengthen, a beast's eye to gleam, It wasn't an illusion of flickering light. It was a deliberate fluid motion, as if the images themselves were breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was impossible, yet here it was. The torch beam trembled in my hand. I traced a particularly disturbing depiction, a swirling vortex, and within it, a myriad of small, angular shapes like shattered stars. They pulsed subtly with the torchlight. My mind, trained to dissect data, to find order in chaos, reeled. I spent hours in that cavern, my initial fear giving way to a morbid fascination. The paintings weren't static representations, they were dynamic. They reacted. They responded. I noticed a recurring motif, a spiral echoing the vortex in the painting. It appeared in the fur of a painted animal, in the whorls of a humanoid figure's hair. It was a symbol, a language. My gaze fell upon a section of the wall where the paintings were sparser. Here, etched directly into the rock, were what looked like astronomical charts, crude, yes, but undeniably celestial. Constellations I recognized, but arranged in unfamiliar configurations. And at the center of it all, the same swirling vortex from the main painting. My breath caught. It wasn't a vortex. It was a gateway, and the angular shapes weren't stars. They were entities traveling. The paintings weren't art, they were a warning, a chronicle. They depicted the arrival. The hum, which had receded to a background thrum, suddenly surged. It wasn't in my headphones, it wasn't in the observatory. It was here, in the earth, in the rock. It vibrated through the cave system, a deep, resonant groan that shook the very foundations of the world. The painted figures on the wall seemed to animate with a terrifying urgency, their movements no longer playful but panicked. The hunter raised his spear not at prey but at the swirling vortex. The beasts bared their painted teeth. I stumbled back, the torchlight skittering across the shifting forms. The spectral lines from my observatory flashed behind my eyes. The anomaly. It wasn't a distant phenomenon, it was a transit. A passage. The paintings were not a record of the past. They were a prophecy. The hum intensified, a deafening roar that drowned out my own ragged gasps. Dust rained from the cavern ceiling. The rock beneath my feet vibrated violently. I looked at the swirling vortex on the wall, now pulsing with an internal, malevolent light. The angular shapes within seemed to grow, to multiply. They weren't just traveling, they were arriving. And the paintings, in their ancient, horrifying language, were screaming it. Was this the purpose? To mark the arrival of something that had passed this way before? Or was it a record of my arrival? The hum had found its way inside me. It vibrated in my bones, a resonance that felt ancient and wrong. Sleep offered no escape, only a deeper immersion in the low, insistent drone that seemed to warp reality itself. I woke with a gasp, my sheets slick with sweat, the phantom pressure still clinging to my eardrums. The dawn outside my observatory windows was a bruised, sickly purple mirroring the disquiet coiling in my gut. It wasn't just the hum. It was the silence between the pulses, the vast, expectant void that seemed to hold its breath. The anomaly, the impossible arrangement of stars, the data that defied every known law of physics. It was a whisper from something too large to comprehend, too alien to be anything but indifferent. And it was coming. I had to tell them. The scientific community, my peers, the world. My fingers, still trembling from the night's torments, fumbled with the satellite phone. I scrolled through the contacts, my mind a frantic scramble of equations and cosmic geometries. The data streams flashed behind my eyes, a dizzying kaleidoscope of impossible patterns. I dialed the number for a prominent astronomical journal. The ringing felt impossibly loud in the stillness of the observatory. My throat was dry. I cleared it, the sound rasping. "Dr. Thorne's office," a brisk voice answered. "Yes, hello," I managed, my voice thinner than I expected. "This is Seth. I need to speak with Dr. Thorne. It's urgent, it's about." "The signal? What signal, Mr. Seth?" "The one from the Kepler 186F system, the deviation. It's not natural. It's a pattern, a deliberate pattern." I could feel the sweat beating on my forehead. The hum seemed to intensify, a subtle crescendo that only I could perceive. "Mr. Seth, Dr. Thorne is very busy, unless I have a peer-reviewed paper." No paper yet," I interrupted, my voice rising. "It's too soon, but the implications, they're catastrophic. It's not just light, it's a presence, it's aware." Another pause, longer this time. I imagined the person on the other end exchanging a look. "Seth, are I feeling all right? Perhaps I should speak to someone who can help." "Help me," I scoffed, a hysterical edge creeping into my tone. "I don't understand. It's not me who needs help, it's all of us. The stars themselves are rearranging, they're aligning. It's a sign, a harbinger." The hum was a physical weight now, pressing down on my chest. I could feel my heart racing, a frantic drumbeat against the cosmic drone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Seth, but I can't assist further," the voice said, polite but firm. The line clicked dead. Frustration warred with a rising panic. They didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. How could they? I could barely articulate it myself, not without sounding like a madman, but the numbers didn't lie. The impossible symmetry, the recurring motifs that echoed in the very structure of spacetime, it was undeniable. I tried another number, a former colleague. His voice, when he finally answered, was gruff. "Seth, what is it? It's the middle of the night." "Daniel, I've found something." I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "In the data, from the deep space array, it's not random, it's a message, or a map, something vast and ancient." "Seth, I've been working too hard, I need to rest, take a break." "Rest, Daniel, this is not about fatigue, the patterns they're not of this universe, they're screaming at us, they're coming." My voice cracked. The hum was a tangible force, making the very metal of the satellite phone feel warm in my hand. "Seth, what are I talking about? It's a consciousness, a colossal, indifferent consciousness, and it's noticed us." "Seth, I'm not making any sense, I sound unwell. Unwell, I'm the only one seeing clearly, the data is clear, the universe is not empty, it's occupied, and whatever occupies it, it's not friendly." I slammed the phone down, the sound echoing in the sudden, suffocating quiet. They wouldn't listen, they couldn't. My own mind felt like a frayed wire, sparking with the sheer impossibility of what I was trying to convey. The hum returned, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the very rock of the mountain. I needed to show them. I needed proof. The observatory's archives, the raw data logs. There had to be something more, something undeniable that would shatter their complacency. But as I turned from the phone, my gaze fell on the small, battered leather-bound journal I kept by my desk. I'd gone seeking solitude, a retreat from the overwhelming vastness of my work. I had stumbled upon a place then, a hidden entrance in the side of a desolate mountain range that led into a vast, echoing network of tunnels. A cave system with paintings that move in torchlight. The locals, few and far between, spoke of it with a mixture of fear and reverence. They said the figures depicted on the walls shifted, their forms subtly altering as the flames danced. I had dismissed it as folklore, a trick of the light and the imagination. But now, could those ancient shifting images be connected? Could they be echoes of the same impossible geometry I was now seeing in the stars? A desperate, irrational hope flickered. The thought was terrifying. It meant the anomaly was not just a distant cosmic event, but something that had already touched this world, leaving its mark in ways I had never understood. The urge to flee the observatory to seek out that forgotten cave was overwhelming. I grabbed my coat, the worn leather cool against my skin. The hum seemed to guide me, a siren song pulling me towards the unknown. As I descended the winding mountain path, the purple dawn bled into a pale, washed-out gray. The hum, though fainter now, was a constant companion, a reminder of the vast, silent intelligence that lay just beyond the veil of our perception. Was this a desperate attempt to find answers, or a descent into a madness that had finally claimed me? The silence after the call was a physical weight. My own breath seemed too loud, a ragged counterpoint to the hum of the servers. They didn't understand. They couldn't. The patterns weren't just data anymore. They were whispers, growing louder, coalescing into a voice I felt in my bones. I needed to get away. Away from the sterile hum, away from the screens that mocked me with their ordered, meaningless digits. My gaze fell on the old maps, the ones I'd pored over before the anomaly consumed my waking thoughts. But now folklore felt like the only truth left. The air outside was crisp, biting. The drive was a blur of desperate urgency. The coordinates led me to a desolate stretch of land, a scarred earth that seemed to hold its breath. The entrance to the cave system was a jagged maw on the side of a cliff, exhaling a damp mineral scent. I took my most powerful torch, its beam a stark white spear against the encroaching twilight. The descent was steep, the air growing heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and ancient. Then I saw them. The paintings, crude yet unsettlingly vibrant. Figures of men and beasts hunting and dancing. But as my torchlight swept across the rough-hewn walls, something shifted. A flicker, a subtle, impossible movement. The painted eyes of aurochs seemed to follow me. The stylized limbs of a hunter appeared to bend, to stride. I told myself it was the torchlight, the uneven surfaces, the tricks of the eye, but the feeling of being watched, of being acknowledged, was undeniable. I pressed deeper, the cave system branching into a labyrinth. The paintings grew more abstract, more disturbing. Spirals that seemed to twist into impossible dimensions, patterns that hinted at forms that defied terrestrial biology. And the movement? It was more pronounced now, not just a flicker but a flow. The lines seemed to melt and reform, the colors bleeding into one another as if the images themselves were breathing. A low thrumming began, subtle at first, like the distant rumble of thunder. It vibrated through the rock, through the soles of my boots, up into my teeth. It was a sound that felt older than mountains, older than stars. It was the sound of presence. I found myself in a vast cavern. The paintings here were unlike anything I'd seen. They covered every surface, a tapestry of the alien and the familiar. And in the center of the cavern, the thrumming intensified. It was no longer a sound, but a sensation. A pressure building behind my eyes, a distortion in the very air. The torchlight faltered, its beam seeming to bend and warp as it struck an unseen barrier. They were no longer mere depictions, they were conduits. The shapes on the walls began to writhe with a horrifying coherence. The spirals uncoiled, the abstract forms began to resolve into something else. Something vast and unknowable, hinted at in the crude strokes of ochre and charcoal. I saw glimpses of things that had no right to exist, impossibles made manifest. The thrumming coalesced into a single, piercing note that threatened to shatter my skull. The torch slipped from my numb fingers, clattering uselessly on the stone floor. I could still see them, not with my eyes, but with a deeper, more terrible sense. They burned behind my eyelids, etched into my very consciousness. The anomaly wasn't just in the data, it was here. It had been here waiting, and now it was reaching out. I could feel its immense, indifferent gaze sweeping over me, a minuscule speck in its incomprehensible awareness. My mind reeled, the last vestiges of my sanity fraying under the impossible strain. I was not just observing, I was being observed. And the observer was not human. It was not even of this reality. What was it that had painted these walls, that resonated in this stone, that now pulsed with such terrifying, silent energy? They couldn't. A voice that spoke of things that were, and things that were not meant to be. The technician, a young man with earnest eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, had stammered about signal interference, about solar flares, about calibration errors. I had just stared, my mind a tempest of calculations that no longer held any meaning. The universe, as I knew it, had fractured. I left the observatory that night, not in my usual measured steps, but with a frantic urgency that propelled me toward the old jeep. The desert air, usually a balm, felt charged, alive with a latent energy that mirrored the thrumming in my own skull. I drove without direction, the headlights carving a narrow path through the inky blackness. My thoughts were a chaotic swarm, each one a barbed shard of understanding I couldn't quite grasp. The vastness I had dedicated my life to studying was not empty. It was occupied by a presence so immense, so alien, that it rendered my very existence a fleeting mote of dust. The jeep finally sputtered to a halt near the mouth of the cave system with paintings that move in torchlight. I'd explored it years ago, a brief dismissive excursion fueled by local folklore. Now it called to me a primal instinct I couldn't ignore. The entrance was a jagged maw in the sandstone, exhaling a cool, damp breath that carried the scent of ancient earth and something else, something coppery and metallic, like blood and rust. I fumbled for my heavy-duty flashlight, its beam a stark white blade against the deepening twilight. Each step echoed, amplified by the rough-hewn walls. The rock was slick under my boots, worn smooth by unseen forces over millennia. I moved deeper, drawn by an invisible thread, my heart a dull, insistent throb against my ribs. Then I saw them. The paintings, they weren't static, not like any cave art I had ever encountered. They were alive. Figures writhed and twisted on the walls, rendered in ochre and charcoal, their limbs elongated, their forms impossibly fluid. As I moved my flashlight beam, the images shifted. A hunting scene transformed into a celestial map, stars and nebulae swirling in impossible configurations. A procession of stick-like figures warped, their bodies elongating, their heads swelling into bulbous, unseeing orbs. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. This was not mere pigment on rock. This was something else. A record, a warning. The torchlight, my own portable sun, seemed to awaken them, coaxing them from their slumber. The painted figures seemed to contort in pain, their silent screams etched into the stone. It was as if the very walls were breathing, exhaling the nightmares of a universe I had only begun to glimpse. I pressed my hand against the cool, rough surface of the cave wall, seeking an anchor in the swirling chaos. My fingers brushed against a section of painting that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. As I watched, the pinpricks began to coalesce, to shift, to form intricate interlocking patterns. They were the same patterns, the same impossible geometries I had seen in the deep space data. My flashlight flickered, the beam weakening. The humming deepened, a resonant thrum that shook the very foundations of the earth. I had to get out. I turned, stumbling back towards the entrance, my boots slipping on the damp floor. The paintings seemed to chase me, their forms elongating, stretching across the walls like grasping tendrils. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The humming was now a deafening roar, a sound that threatened to tear me apart from the inside. I reached the entrance, gasping for air, for sanity. The desert night was a welcome, if alien, embrace. The faint glow from within had intensified, a sickly, phosphorescent light that spilled out onto the sand. Had I imagined it? Had the isolation, the data, finally broken me? The patterns, they weren't just in the stars or in the data, they were here and they were watching. What had I awakened? They couldn't. A voice that promised nothing but a vast, unblinking gaze. I had to get out, not just from the observatory, but from this entire world that insisted on its comforting, fragile illusions. The anomaly, the thing, it wasn't a distant phenomenon. It was a presence, seeping through the cracks of reality. The coordinates I'd been feeding into the spectral analysis, the ones that had sent me spiraling into sleepless nights, they weren't pointing outwards. They were pointing inwards, towards a place I'd only ever seen in fragmented dreams. My car was a blur of motion, tires spitting gravel as I navigated the deserted access road. The city lights receded, swallowed by an encroaching, star-dusted blackness. I drove for hours, the hum of the engine a monotonous drone against the rising crescendo of my own thoughts. The maps on my dash display had long since dissolved into meaningless geometric patterns, the GPS signal lost somewhere in the desolate plains. I was following an instinct, a primal pull towards a truth that had been buried for millennia. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and mineral. The road dissolved into a rutted track, then vanished altogether. The entrance to the cave system with paintings that move in torchlight. It smelled of stone and stagnant water, a forgotten breath of the world. The paintings, crude, stylized figures depicting scenes that writhed at the periphery of my vision. A hunter, spear raised, his prey a swirling vortex of impossible geometry. Stars, not as pinpricks of light, but as gaping mouths. I moved deeper, my light dancing across the ancient artistry. The torchlight, I realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't the source of the movement. It was the paintings themselves, shifting, reconfiguring, as if responding to some unseen stimulus. A serpentine creature depicted coiled around a celestial orb unfurled its coils, its painted eye seeming to fix on me. This was not art, this was a record. A warning, the patterns, the anomaly. It wasn't a celestial body. It was a consciousness, an ancient entity that had reached out, not across space, but across time. And these paintings, these crude depictions, were the earliest attempts by those who had seen it before to record its passage, to chart its arrival. My hand trembled as I traced a symbol on the wall, a spiral that seemed to draw my gaze into its impossible depth. The air thrummed, a low vibration that resonated in my teeth. The figures on the wall began to move with a frantic energy, their painted forms blurring, coalescing. The hunter's spear was no longer aimed at a beast, but at a sky that was tearing open. The gaping mouths of the stars were now a single, colossal maw. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. They were in the cave, echoing off the stone, a chorus of alien lamentations. The ground beneath my feet vibrated with increasing intensity. The paintings weren't just moving anymore. They were bleeding into reality. The stone itself seemed to warp, the smooth surface rippling like disturbed water. I saw it then, not with my eyes, but with a deeper sense, a part of me that had been awakened by the anomaly. Not a physical object, but a distortion, a tear in existence. It was the anomaly. It was the intelligence. It was the arrival. The air was filled with a sound that was not sound, a pressure that was not physical. The paintings on the walls were a frantic, desperate chronicle of a cosmic event, a slow, inevitable encroaching. They were not art. They were the last desperate testament of those who had witnessed the dawning of a new, terrifying epoch. I could feel it pressing in, a silent, indifferent weight. The world I knew was already gone, a faint memory against the encroaching immensity. There was no escape, no understanding that could offer solace. The paintings were no longer on the walls. They were the walls. They were the air. They were the only truth left. Was this the end, or merely the beginning of something I could no longer perceive?